Charles Lucky Luciano, an Italian-born mobster, primarily operated within the United States. Initially associated with the 5 Points Gang, Luciano played a pivotal role in shaping the national crime syndicate. Widely regarded as the architect of modern organized crime in the U.S., Luciano established the Commission in 1931, effectively dismantling Salvatore Maranzano's position as the boss of bosses after the Castellamarese War. Additionally, he became the inaugural official head of the modern Genovese crime family. In 1936, Luciano faced trial and conviction for offenses related to prostitution, following extensive investigations by District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey. He received a 30 to 50-year prison sentence, but during World War II, a deal was struck between the Department of the Navy and Luciano's associate Meyer Lansky from the Jewish mob, leveraging Luciano's knowledge for naval intelligence. Consequently, in 1946, owing to his purported wartime assistance, his sentence was commuted, contingent upon his deportation to Italy. Luciano passed away in Italy on January 26, 1962, with permission granted for his remains to be transported back to the United States for burial. Luciano, originally named Salvatore Lucania, was born on November 24, 1897, in Lercara Fritti, Sicily, Italy. His parents, Antonio Lucania and Rosalia Caffarella, had 4 other children: Bartolomeo, born 1890, Giuseppe, born 1898, Filippa, born 1901, and Concetta. Antonio worked in a sulfur mine in Sicily and harbored a strong desire to move to the United States. In The Last Testament of Lucky Luciano, the Mafia Story in his own words, a purported semi-autobiography published posthumously, Luciano recounted his father's determination to save money for the voyage by stashing coins in a jar beneath their bed each year, using a new Palermo-based steamship company calendar as a reminder. To avoid asking for financial assistance, Antonio's cousin, Rotolo, discreetly provided funds to Rosalia in Lercara Fritti. While the book is generally considered accurate, doubts about its authenticity have emerged. It was allegedly based on conversations between Luciano and Hollywood producer Martin Gosch before Luciano's death. The New York Times highlighted discrepancies such as references to events occurring after Luciano's death, repetition of errors from previous Mafia publications, and Luciano's involvement in meetings during his incarceration. In April 1906, when Luciano was 8, the family immigrated to the United States, settling in New York City's Lower East Side, a renowned hub for Italian immigrants. At 14, Luciano left school and took up a job delivering hats for $7 a week. However, after winning $244 in a dice game, he abandoned his job to pursue street ventures. Consequently, his parents enrolled him in the Brooklyn Truancy School. During his teenage years, Luciano established his own gang and became associated with the renowned 5 Points Gang. Diverging from typical street gang activities focused on petty crimes, Luciano offered protection to Jewish youth against Italian and Irish gangs for a fee of 10 cents per week. Concurrently, he delved into the world of pimping during the World War I era. Luciano's encounter with Meyer Lansky occurred in his teenage years when he attempted to extort protection money from Lansky during his walk home from school. Impressed by Lansky's bold responses to his threats, Luciano forged a lasting partnership with the younger boy. The origins of Luciano's nickname, Lucky, remain unclear. Speculation suggests it may have stemmed from surviving a brutal assault and throat slashing by 3 men in 1929 after refusing to work for another mob boss. Alternatively, it could be linked to his gambling success or a simple mispronunciation of his last name. Despite being arrested 25 times between 1916 and 1936 on charges ranging from assault to illegal gambling, blackmail, and robbery, Luciano never served time in prison. Similarly, the alteration of his surname to Luciano lacks definitive explanation, with some attributing it to persistent misspellings by newspapers. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution ushered in prohibition, which endured until its repeal in 1933. This amendment outlawed the manufacturing, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages, leading to a persistent demand for alcohol. Consequently, a thriving black market emerged, offering criminals a lucrative new revenue stream. By 1920, Luciano had crossed paths with numerous future mafia leaders, including Vito Genovese and Frank Costello, both of whom he befriended during his tenure with the 5 Points Gang. During this time, Lower Manhattan gang leader Joe Masseria enlisted Luciano as one of his gunmen. Simultaneously, Luciano and his inner circle began collaborating with gambler Arnold, the Brain, Rothstein, who recognized the lucrative potential of prohibition and educated Luciano on the intricacies of bootleg alcohol operations. With financial backing from Rothstein, Luciano, Costello, and Genovese launched their own bootlegging enterprise. Rothstein assumed a mentorship role for Luciano, imparting valuable lessons on navigating high society. In 1923, Luciano's involvement in a heroin sting tarnished his reputation among affluent associates and clients. To restore his standing, Luciano orchestrated a strategic move, purchasing 200 premium seats for the Jack Dempsey-Luis Firpo boxing match in the Bronx and distributing them to influential gangsters and politicians. Rothstein further bolstered Luciano's image by taking him on a lavish shopping spree at Wanamaker's department store in Manhattan to procure upscale attire for the event, ultimately salvaging Luciano's reputation. By 1925, Luciano's illicit ventures in New York, coupled with operations extending into Philadelphia, yielded staggering profits, with an annual gross exceeding $12 million and personal earnings hovering around $4 million from illegal gambling and bootlegging activities. Luciano swiftly rose to prominence as a key figure in Joe Masseria's criminal syndicate. In stark contrast to Arnold Rothstein, Masseria lacked formal education, exhibited crude manners, and possessed limited organizational skills. By the late 1920s, Masseria found himself in a bitter rivalry with Salvatore Maranzano, who had arrived from Sicily to lead the Castellamarese clan. When one of Masseria's lieutenants, Gaetano Reina, defected to Maranzano's side, Masseria tasked Luciano with orchestrating Reina's assassination. Following Reina's murder on February 26, 1930, tensions between Masseria and Maranzano erupted into the violent conflict known as the Castellamarese War. Both Masseria and Maranzano belonged to the old guard of mafia bosses, commonly referred to as Mustache Petes. Rooted in traditional Italian mafia values, they upheld principles of honor, tradition, respect, and dignity. These bosses adamantly refused to collaborate with non-Italians and harbored skepticism towards non-Sicilians. Some of the most conservative among them only worked with individuals hailing from their own Sicilian hometowns. In stark contrast, Luciano demonstrated a willingness to engage in partnerships not only with Italians but also with Jewish and Irish gangsters, provided there was profit to be made. Luciano found it incredulous when traditional Sicilian mafiosi admonished him for his association with his close friend Costello, whom they derogatorily referred to as the Dirty Calabrian. Luciano swiftly forged connections with fellow young mobsters, all Italian-born but kickstarting their criminal endeavors in the United States, who bristled against their boss's conservative ways. Drawing from lessons learned under Rothstein's tutelage, Luciano aspired to transform their gang operations into sprawling criminal enterprises. As the conflict unfolded, this cohort expanded to encompass future mob titans such as Costello, Genovese, Albert Anastasia, Joe Adonis, Joe Bonanno, Carlo Gambino, Joe Profaci, Tommy Gagliano, and Tommy Lucchese. They viewed their boss's avarice and antiquated attitudes as hindrances to their prosperity, contrasting sharply with the wealth accruing to Irish and Jewish gangs. Luciano envisioned a nationwide crime syndicate wherein Italian, Jewish, and Irish gangs could unite their resources, turning organized crime into a lucrative venture for all involved. An aspiration realized through the formation of an organization following a summit in Atlantic City convened by Luciano, Johnny Torrio, Lansky, and Costello in May 1929. In October 1929, Luciano fell prey to a brutal abduction, ambushed at gunpoint and subjected to a savage beating and stabbing before being hoisted by his hands from a warehouse beam in Staten Island. Despite surviving the ordeal, he bore permanent scars, including a distinctive drooping eye. The perpetrators of this assault remained unidentified. When questioned by authorities after the attack, Luciano claimed ignorance regarding his assailants. However, in a 1953 interview, he alleged that the police orchestrated the abduction and assault in a misguided attempt to locate Jack Legs Diamond. Alternatively, another account posits Maranzano's involvement in ordering the attack. In early 1931, Luciano made the decision to eliminate Masseria. With the tide of the war turning against Masseria, Luciano recognized an opportune moment to switch sides. Striking a clandestine agreement with Maranzano, Luciano pledged to orchestrate Masseria's demise in exchange for assuming control of Masseria's criminal operations and securing the position of Maranzano's second-in-command. Joe Adonis, aligned with the Masseria faction, was approached by Masseria to carry out Luciano's assassination, but instead, Adonis tipped off Luciano about the impending murder plot. On April 15, 1931, Masseria met his end at Nuova Villa Tamaro, a restaurant in Coney Island, Brooklyn. While engaged in a card game, Luciano purportedly excused himself under the pretense of using the restroom. At this juncture, gunmen, reportedly including Anastasia, Genovese, Adonis, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, entered the establishment. Ciro, the Artichoke King, Terranova facilitated their getaway but allegedly became too rattled to drive off, necessitating Siegel's intervention to assume control of the vehicle. With Maranzano's approval, Luciano assumed leadership of Masseria's gang, solidifying his position as Maranzano's trusted lieutenant and bringing an end to the Castellamarese War. Following Masseria's demise, Maranzano undertook a restructuring of the Italian-American criminal factions in New York City, establishing the 5 families led by Luciano, Profassi, Gagliano, Vincent Mangano, and himself. Maranzano convened a gathering of crime bosses in Wappingers Falls, New York, proclaiming himself capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. Maranzano also redistributed the rival families' criminal enterprises in favor of his own. While outwardly appearing to acquiesce to these changes, Luciano was quietly strategizing his move against Maranzano. Despite Maranzano's marginally progressive outlook compared to Masseria, Luciano came to view Maranzano as even more rapacious and entrenched in outdated practices than his predecessor. By September 1931, Maranzano grew wary of Luciano's influence and enlisted Vincent, Mad Dog, Call, an Irish gangster, to eliminate him. However, Lucchese alerted Luciano to the imminent threat on his life. Sensing danger, Luciano, Genovese, and Costello were summoned by Maranzano to his office at the Helmsley Building in Manhattan on September 10. Suspecting Maranzano's intentions to be lethal, Luciano opted to take preemptive action. He dispatched 4 Jewish gangsters, whose identities were unfamiliar to Maranzano's associates, with assistance from Lansky and Siegel. Disguised as government agents, 2 gangsters disarmed Maranzano's bodyguards, while the other 2, aided by Lucchese, identified Maranzano and proceeded to stab him repeatedly before fatally shooting him. This pivotal assassination marked the commencement of what later became known as the Night of the Sicilian Vespers. Several days later, on September 13, the bodies of 2 additional Maranzano allies, Samuel Monaco and Louis Russo, were discovered in Newark Bay, showing signs of torture. Concurrently, Joseph Saragusa, leader of the Pittsburgh crime family, was gunned down in his residence. The disappearance of Joe Artizone, head of the Los Angeles family, on October 15, was subsequently linked to this purported scheme aimed at swiftly eliminating the Old World Sicilian bosses. However, the notion of an organized, coordinated purge orchestrated by Luciano has been debunked as a myth. With Maranzano's demise, Luciano ascended as the predominant crime figure in the United States, attaining the apex of the nation's underworld. He dictated policies and orchestrated operations alongside fellow mafia bosses, wielding significant influence across various criminal enterprises. Luciano's own crime syndicate held sway over lucrative illicit ventures in New York City, including illegal gambling, extortion, bookmaking, loansharking, and drug trafficking. Moreover, he wielded considerable power in labor union affairs and exercised control over key sectors like the Manhattan waterfront, garbage disposal, construction, businesses in the garment district, and trucking. While Luciano could have easily declared himself capo di tutti capi, he opted to abolish the title, recognizing its potential to sow discord among the families and draw the attention of ambitious challengers. Instead, he quietly retained control through the commission by cultivating unofficial alliances with fellow bosses. Despite discarding some of Maranzano's reforms, Luciano preserved certain aspects, such as the ritual of becoming a made man in a crime family, albeit considering it a relic of Sicilian tradition. Genovese successfully persuaded Luciano to retain this title, citing the necessity of rituals to enforce family loyalty among younger members. Luciano remained staunchly committed to omerta, the code of silence, as a shield against legal prosecution, and upheld Maranzano's structure of the 5 crime families in New York City. Luciano elevated his most trusted Italian confidants to prominent positions within what was now the Luciano crime family, with Genovese assuming the role of underboss and Costello serving as consigliere. Adonis, Michael Trigger Mike Coppola, Anthony Strollo, Willie Moretti, and Anthony Carfano were appointed as caporegimes. Although Lansky and Siegel were not of Italian descent and therefore ineligible for official roles within any mafia family, they held significant sway as top advisors and trusted associates to Luciano. In the latter part of 1931, Luciano convened a gathering in Chicago with several crime bosses, presenting the concept of a commission to serve as the central governing body for organized crime. This commission, devised to adjudicate disputes and allocate territories among families, has been hailed as Luciano's crowning achievement. His objectives with the commission were twofold: to clandestinely assert his authority over all families while preempting future gang conflicts. The proposal garnered unanimous approval from the assembled bosses. Initially, the commission comprised representatives from the 5 families of New York City, the Buffalo crime family, and the Chicago outfit. Subsequently, the crime families of Philadelphia and Detroit were incorporated, with smaller families being formally represented by a commission-affiliated family. Additionally, the Commission extended representation to Jewish criminal organizations in New York. The Commission faced its inaugural challenge in 1935 when it intervened in Dutch Schultz's scheme to assassinate Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey. Luciano cautioned against Dewey's murder, fearing severe law enforcement repercussions, prompting the Commission to enact a strict decree prohibiting harm to law enforcement officials and prosecutors. Schultz, defiant, vowed to proceed with his plan and stormed out of the meeting. Albert Anastasia, leader of Murder, Inc., later informed Luciano that Schultz had tasked him with surveilling Dewey's residence on Fifth Avenue. Upon learning of this development, the Commission convened a discreet session to address the situation. Following 6 hours of deliberation, the Commission ordered Lepke Buchalter to eliminate Schultz. On October 23, 1935, before Schultz could execute his plan, he was gunned down in a tavern in Newark, New Jersey, succumbing to his injuries the following day. In the early 1930s, Luciano's criminal syndicate commenced the takeover of modest prostitution enterprises across New York City. By June 1935, New York Governor Herbert H. Lehman appointed Dewey, a U.S. attorney, as a special prosecutor tasked with combating organized crime within the city. Leading the charge was Dewey's assistant district attorney, Eunice Carter, who spearheaded an investigation into prostitution racketeering, linking Luciano, the city's most influential gangster, to this illicit network. Carter meticulously scrutinized the financial transactions within the New York, New Jersey prostitution network, constructing a case of racketeering supported by evidence gathered from interviews with prostitutes and wiretap surveillance. On February 2, 1936, Dewey authorized a large-scale raid on 200 brothels across Manhattan and Brooklyn, catapulting him into the national spotlight as a prominent gangbuster. Anticipating potential police corruption, Dewey deployed 160 officers from outside the Vice Squad to execute the raids. These officers were instructed to await orders on street corners until moments before the raids commenced. Unlike previous Vice raids, where arrestees were promptly released, Dewey's crackdown saw 16 men and 87 women detained and brought to his offices, where Judge Philip J. McCook set exorbitant bails of $10,000, surpassing their financial means. Carter, having cultivated trust with several of the arrested individuals, persuaded them to testify rather than endure prolonged incarceration. By mid-March, numerous defendants had implicated Luciano, with 3 prostitutes identifying him as the mastermind to whom associates David Bettolo and Thomas Pinocchio ultimately answered. In late March 1936, Luciano received word of an impending arrest and fled to Hot Springs, Arkansas. A New York detective, coincidentally in Hot Springs for an unrelated assignment, recognized Luciano and promptly notified Dewey. On April 3, Luciano was apprehended in Hot Springs on a criminal warrant from New York, charging him with 90 counts of compulsory prostitution. Luciano's legal team in Arkansas mounted an aggressive extradition defense. On April 6, Oni Madden, former owner of the Cotton Club, attempted to bribe Arkansas Attorney General Carl E. Bailey with $50,000 to aid Luciano's case. However, Bailey staunchly rejected the bribe and promptly reported the incident. On April 17, following the exhaustion of all legal avenues, Arkansas authorities relinquished Luciano to 3 detectives from the New York City Police Department for transportation by train back to New York to face trial. Upon reaching St. Louis, Missouri, the detectives and Luciano transferred trains under the guard of 20 local police officers, deterring any potential rescue attempts by mobs. The group arrived in New York on April 18, and Luciano was arraigned and incarcerated the next day after failing to secure the $350,000 bail bonds set by Judge McCook. The pandering trial of Luciano and 12 co-defendants commenced on May 11, 1936, with Dewey personally leading the prosecution, building on the groundwork laid by Carter. Luciano was accused of involvement in a sprawling prostitution ring referred to as the bonding combination. During the trial, Dewey meticulously exposed Luciano's falsehoods on the witness stand through direct questioning and telephone call records. Luciano struggled to explain the stark disparity between his reported annual income of $22,000 on federal tax records and his evident affluence. Dewey relentlessly pressed Luciano on his extensive arrest record and associations with prominent gangsters like Masseria, Terranova, and Buchalter. On June 7, Luciano and his remaining co-defendants were found guilty on 62 counts of compulsory prostitution. Subsequently, on June 18, Luciano was handed a sentence of 30 to 50 years in state prison. In his book, 5 Families, veteran The New York Times organized crime columnist Selwyn Robb highlighted scholarly skepticism regarding Luciano's direct involvement in the bonding combination. Robb noted evidence suggesting Luciano benefited from prostitution proceeds and that members of his family operated a protection racket ensnaring many of New York City's madams and brothel owners. However, Robb underscored the reluctance among mafia and legal scholars to attribute direct involvement in a prostitution ring to a crime boss of Luciano's stature. Robb critiqued the purportedly astonishingly thin evidence presented by Dewey, suggesting extortion charges would have been more apt. Robb also criticized Luciano's defense team, led by attorney George Morton Levy, for allowing Luciano to testify, providing Dewey with an opportunity to undermine his credibility during cross-examination. After the trial, all 4 prostitutes who directly implicated Luciano in the purported bonding combination, Nancy Presser, Mildred Harris, Thelma Jordan, and Florence "Cokie Flo" Brown, withdrew their testimony. Additionally, at least 2 of Luciano's contemporaries refuted claims of his involvement in the combination. In her memoirs, New York society Madame Polly Adler asserted that had Luciano been associated with the combination, she would have been privy to such information. Similarly, Bonanno, the last surviving contemporary of Luciano not incarcerated, dismissed allegations of Luciano's direct involvement in prostitution in his book, A Man of Honor. Bonanno contended that Luciano's subordinates leveraged his name to coerce brothel owners into paying for protection, suggesting that Dewey's case was built more against Luciano's reputation than against Luciano himself. Crucial witnesses at Luciano's trial testified to his participation in prostitution racketeering, recounting how he frequently engaged in discussions about the sex industry. On one occasion, Luciano likened the business to the same as the A&P stores are, a large syndicate. The same as chain stores, and instructed a subordinate to take action when a brothel failed to meet its financial obligations. Furthermore, a witness revealed that Luciano, operating from his Waldorf Astoria suite, personally hired him to collect payments from bookers and madams. While incarcerated, Luciano maintained control over his crime family by issuing directives through acting boss Genovese. However, in 1937, Genovese fled to Naples to evade an imminent murder indictment in New York. In his absence, Luciano appointed his consigliere, Costello, as the new acting boss and overseer of his interests. Initially held at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York, Luciano was later transferred to Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora in 1936, a remote location far removed from New York City. At Clinton, Bettolo, an associate, prepared specialized meals for Luciano in a designated kitchen. Despite his incarceration, Luciano wielded influence to facilitate the construction of a church within the prison premises. This church gained renown for being one of the few freestanding churches in the New York State correctional system, notable for housing 2 original doors from the Victoria, the ship of Ferdinand Magellan. Luciano pursued legal appeals until October 10, 1938, when the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review his case. Consequently, Luciano relinquished his role as family boss, and Costello formally assumed leadership. During World War II, the U.S. government struck a clandestine agreement with Luciano while he was imprisoned. In 1942, the Office of Naval Intelligence expressed concerns about the infiltration of German and Italian agents into the U.S. via the New York waterfront and potential sabotage in these areas. Recognizing the Mafia's control over the waterfront, the U.S. Navy approached Lansky to broker a deal with Luciano. To facilitate negotiations, Luciano was transferred to the Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York, which was closer to New York City. A deal was reached among the Navy, the state of New York, and Luciano. In exchange for a reduction in his sentence, Luciano pledged full cooperation from his organization in providing intelligence to the Navy. Anastasia, a Luciano ally overseeing the docks, purportedly ensured no dockworker strikes during wartime. Ahead of the 1943 Allied invasion of Sicily, Luciano reportedly furnished the U.S. military with contacts within the Sicilian Mafia. This collaboration between the Navy and the Mafia was dubbed Operation Underworld. The extent of Luciano's contributions to the war effort remains a subject of debate. In 1947, the naval officer overseeing Operation Underworld downplayed the significance of Luciano's wartime assistance. However, a 1954 report commissioned by then-Governor Dewey acknowledged Luciano's provision of valuable services to naval intelligence. Luciano claimed that the threat to the docks was orchestrated by the sinking of the SS Normandy in New York Harbor, allegedly orchestrated by Anastasia's brother, Anthony Anastasio. Nevertheless, an official investigation into the ship sinking found no evidence of sabotage. On January 3, 1946, as a presumed reward for his purported wartime collaboration, Dewey reluctantly commuted Luciano's sentence for pandering on the condition that he agreed to be deported to Italy without resistance. Luciano accepted the terms, although he maintained his status as a U.S. citizen and contested deportation. On February 2, 1946, 2 federal immigration agents transported Luciano from Sing Sing prison to Ellis Island in New York Harbor for deportation proceedings. The night before his departure, on February 9, Luciano shared a spaghetti dinner on his freighter with Anastasia and 5 other guests. On February 10, Luciano's ship set sail from Brooklyn Harbor bound for Italy. After a 17-day voyage, the vessel arrived in Naples on February 28. Upon arrival, Luciano informed reporters that he would likely reside in Sicily. In October 1946, Luciano undertook a covert journey to Havana, Cuba, embarking on a freighter from Naples to Caracas, Venezuela, followed by a flight to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. From there, he traveled to Mexico City before circling back to Caracas, where he boarded a private plane to Camagüey, Cuba. On October 29, he arrived in Havana and settled into an estate in the Miramar district, aiming to position himself closer to the United States to resume control over American Mafia operations and eventually return home. Lansky had already established himself as a prominent investor in Cuban gambling and hotel ventures. In December 1946, Lansky convened a gathering of the heads of major crime families in Havana, known as the Havana Conference. While singer Frank Sinatra's performance served as the public reason for the meeting, its true purpose was to discuss underworld affairs, with Luciano in attendance. The conference, held at the Hotel Nacional de Cuba, spanned a little over a week and focused on 3 main topics: the heroin trade, Cuban gambling enterprises, and the situation regarding Siegel and his struggling Flamingo Hotel project in Las Vegas. During the conference on December 20, Luciano held a private meeting with Genovese in his hotel suite. Having recently been acquitted of his 1934 murder charge, Genovese sought to assert himself as a de facto boss of bosses, and requested Luciano's endorsement. Luciano firmly rebuffed Genovese's proposal, asserting that there was no such hierarchical title and reaffirming his own authority. Despite public appearances alongside Sinatra and frequenting nightclubs, Luciano's presence in Havana was soon noticed by U.S. authorities, who began pressuring the Cuban government to expel him. On February 21, 1947, U.S. Narcotics Commissioner Harry J. Anslinger informed the Cubans that all shipments of narcotic prescription drugs would be blocked as long as Luciano remained in Cuba. Responding to this pressure, the Cuban government announced on February 23 that Luciano was in custody and would be deported to Italy within 48 hours. Subsequently, Luciano was placed on a freighter bound for Genoa. Following Luciano's clandestine journey to Cuba, he lived out the remainder of his life under close police surveillance in Italy. Upon his arrival in Genoa on April 11, 1947, Italian authorities arrested him and transferred him to a jail in Palermo. On May 11, a regional commission in Palermo cautioned Luciano to avoid trouble and subsequently released him. In early July 1949, Luciano faced arrest in Rome on suspicions of narcotics trafficking to New York. After spending a week in custody, he was released without charges, albeit with a permanent ban from visiting Rome. On June 9, 1951, Naples police interrogated Luciano over allegations of illegally importing $57,000 in cash and a new American car into Italy. Following 20 hours of questioning, Luciano was released without charges. In 1952, the Italian government revoked Luciano's passport following complaints from U.S. and Canadian law enforcement agencies. On November 1, 1954, a judicial commission in Naples imposed stringent restrictions on Luciano for a 2-year period. These measures mandated that he report to the police every Sunday, remain at home every night, and obtain police permission before leaving Naples. The commission cited Luciano's purported involvement in the narcotics trade as grounds for these limitations. By 1957, Genovese felt confident enough to make a move against Luciano and his interim boss, Costello. He received support from Carlo Gambino, the underboss of the Anastasia family. On May 2, 1957, following Genovese's instructions, Vincent Chin Giganti ambushed Costello in the lobby of his Central Park apartment building, the Majestic. Giganti shouted, "This is for you, Frank," and as Costello turned, he was shot in the head. Although Giganti believed he had successfully killed Costello, the bullet only grazed his head, and Costello survived without serious injury. Despite Costello's refusal to cooperate with the authorities, Giganti was arrested for attempted murder. However, he was acquitted during the trial, expressing gratitude to Costello in the courtroom after the verdict. Costello, conceding control of what is now known as the Genovese crime family to Genovese, was allowed to retire, and Luciano was unable to intervene. On October 25, 1957, Genovese and Gambino orchestrated the successful assassination of Anastasia, another associate of Luciano. The following month, Genovese convened a meeting of crime bosses in Appalachian, New York, aiming to secure approval for his takeover of the Luciano family and to assert his national dominance. However, the Appalachian meeting turned chaotic when law enforcement conducted a raid. Over 65 high-ranking mobsters were arrested, and the Mafia faced widespread publicity and numerous grand jury summonses. Blaming Genovese for the debacle, enraged mobsters created an opportunity for Genovese's adversaries. Allegedly, Luciano attended a meeting in a hotel in Palermo to discuss heroin trafficking as part of the French connection. Following the meeting, Luciano purportedly contributed to a payment of $100,000 to a Puerto Rican drug dealer to falsely implicate Genovese in a drug transaction. On April 4, 1959, Genovese was convicted in New York of conspiracy to violate federal narcotics laws. Serving a 15-year prison sentence, Genovese attempted to manage his crime family from behind bars until his death in 1969. On January 26, 1962, Luciano passed away due to a heart attack at Naples International Airport. He had visited the airport to meet with American producer Martin Gosch regarding a film adaptation of his life. Initially hesitant to approve such a project to avoid upsetting other Mafia members, Luciano reportedly changed his stance after the passing of his longtime partner, Igea Lissoni. Following the meeting with Gosch, Luciano suffered a heart attack and passed away. Unbeknownst to him, Italian drug enforcement agents had been trailing him to the airport, anticipating his arrest on charges related to drug smuggling. 3 days later, a funeral service for Luciano in Naples drew 300 attendees. His body was transported through the streets of Naples in a horse-drawn black hearse. With authorization from the U.S. government, Luciano's family brought his remains back to New York for interment. He was laid to rest at St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens, with over 2,000 mourners attending his funeral. Gambino, a close confidant of Luciano, delivered the eulogy. In 1998, Time magazine described Luciano as the criminal mastermind among the top 20 most influential figures and titans of the 20th century. In 1929, Luciano crossed paths with Gay Orlova, a prominent dancer at the Hollywood nightclub on Broadway. Their bond remained strong until his imprisonment, although they never formalized their relationship through marriage. In early 1948, he encountered Igea Lissoni, a Milanese ballerina who was 20 years his junior, and whom he later regarded as the love of his life. By summer, Lissoni had moved in with him. While some reports suggest they married in 1949, others indicate they merely exchanged rings. Luciano and Lissoni shared a residence in Naples. Despite his ongoing affairs with other women, their relationship was marked by frequent arguments, often resulting in physical altercations initiated by Luciano. Tragically, Lissoni succumbed to breast cancer in 1959. Throughout his life, Luciano never became a father. He once explained his decision, expressing a desire to shield any potential offspring from the stigma of being associated with a notorious figure like himself. I didn't want any child of mine to endure the burden of being known as the offspring of Luciano, the gangster. That's one thing I still resent Dewey for, branding me a gangster in the eyes of the world.